Have you been told that your cholesterol is high or that you need to lower it or that you have to change your diet or your lifestyle to lower your cholesterol? Are you confused by all the information about good and bad cholesterol? And what is all this? We bring on a guest. His name is Dr. Johnny Bowden. Johnny is the best-selling author of a book called The Great Cholesterol Myth. And this is a deep dive into cholesterol and all the myths and misinformation about this topic. We asked Johnny questions about um, different types of lipids, including cholesterol, how to test lipids, what to ask your doctor. We could cover a huge array of information in this video. So without further ado, here's our interview with Dr. Johnny Bowden.
Hi, Johnny. It's great to have you here. I would like to have a question that how was your lifestyle before you get involved in nutrition and health? Tell us what your early life and what makes you to change course of your lifestyle.
I started life as a musician. So my previous career up to 1990 or so, I was a musical director and pianist. And I did Broadway shows and I did national tours and I did all kinds of stuff like that. But somewhere along the line in the late 60s, early 70s, I guess, 70s, I really came from the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle, and I was a jazz musician, and all of our heroes were heroin addicts. So I didn't, a healthy lifestyle, it wasn't even something I really knew about. I was overweight. I smoked a pack of Marlboros a day. I thought a breakfast was, a couple of aspirins and coffee and, a cigarette. And I had a fairly successful career as a musician, middle level. I mean, I wasn't aspiring. I made my living at it. I did national tours of shows like Cats and Joseph and the Amazing. But I picked up quite a little alcohol and drug habit. And somewhere, I guess, around early 80s, that stopped. And I began to get a little bit healthier just by giving up alcohol and drugs. And I'd go on tour with actors, and their job was to look good. And we had a lot of time in the daytime because we get to a city, we do a sound check, we do a setup, and then we're free until the 8 shows at night. And they all went to the gym, and they all did all this stuff. And I was always kind of fascinated with people who did all those things, like they ran and they ate at health food stores. By the way, we did not have Whole Foods and we did not have the internet. So what we had was what were called health food stores. And the people who went there were called health nuts. Oh, he's a health nut. He eats whatever. So that was the environment. And I just, partly out of boredom, partly because I thought, well, now that I'm not doing drugs and alcohol, maybe I could look a little better and lose a little weight. And I started hanging out with the actors, and I said, okay, one day, I really literally out of boredom, I remembered, I think it was 1982, and I said, show me some of these exercises you do every day. So I went with one of them to the gym. And you know how sometimes when people find something, they just get bit by a bug and they go, oh my God, I like this. Without belaboring it, in the course of about a year, I knew where the gym was in every one of the tour stops. We go to Dallas, I check in, we go to Doug's gym. I knew all of them. I knew where the health food stores were. I began to change my diet towards what I thought was healthy at the time. Like, well, I think maybe I'll eat less meat, stuff like that. And I began to transform. Not all at once. I was not a quick learner. I was not the guy that got, found Jesus, got a revelation, changed everything. I was the guy that went to the gym, would do a set of bench presses and go out and have a cigarette on the break. So it took a while. I found that I really loved how I felt. And then I started losing weight. And then I started having more energy. And being a New York City, Jewish, upper middle class, academically inclined, coming from a home like that, the first thing I thought of was like, how do you get a degree in this stuff? because you're not, in that home, if you don't have a degree in something, you don't know anything about it. So at the time, the only real information we had about training was magazines like Muscle, and I used to call it Muscle and Fiction magazine, but Muscle and Fitness. And everybody said different things, do high reps, do low reps, do push-pull training, no, do chest and back one day and legs the next. There were a million different things out there, and there was no way to get really good information. So I found out that you could get certified as a personal trainer, that there was actually that there was actually like a course that you could take, and they would give you a certificate as a trainer. And I thought my thought was, man, that would look so cool on the playbill on a Broadway show to say, here, they're writing about the conductor and they go, and he's also certified as a personal trainer. I thought, oh God, I'd get so many girls if they saw that. And I mean, that was the way I was thinking. So I decided I'm going to take one of these weekend courses and get certified in personal training. So I took the AFA course, the American Academy of Fitness, and it's the lowest of the different certifying bodies, but I did that course. And I came out of it loving it even more. And I thought, oh my God, this is what I was, I'm okay as a musician, but I could be great at this. This is just, I love this. So I picked up the next certification you could get going up the ranks. And then I got the ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine, the National Association of Sports Medicine, and the Strength and Conditioning one in Washington. I got 6 certifications, and I had still never, ever trained a client. I just knew how to do it myself. And I thought I'd be pretty good because along the way, I picked up a master's in psychology, which I at one point wanted to be a clinical psychologist before the drug addiction and stuff. So I actually did have a psych background, which had served me incredibly well in my work in nutrition and personal training. So it was around, I think, 1991 now, this new me, pretty in shape, and newly motivated and excited about the world and about training. And I was walking in my neighborhood in New York City, in Manhattan, and I see this big sign, and it looks like a really cool new gym is going to open. And they've got the signs that says Equinox, opening September, on the equinox, the day of the equinox is, I think, September 21st, 1991. They're opening. It says hiring now. So with all of the, the naiveness of someone who's never done anything like this, I walk in and go, I'm a personal trainer. I've got these certifications. I really don't know why they hired me. I think I connected with the owners, the Ericos. We had there was just something. I was older than the 22-year-olds who were going there. In my early 40s, late 30s. I have a career in music. I'm fairly well spoken, and they're basically hiring 22-year-old surfer boys who can. And I think that we just sort of maybe connected, but they hired me. So on the day that they open, Equinox opens its very first health club in Manhattan. I'm there on the floor, and I was there for 7 years. And during those 7 years, I became the dean of the Equinox Fitness Training Institute. And because I had a background because I'm a good speaker, they started sending me out to speak for Equinox and a lot of publicity things. So whenever these publicists would call Equinox, we need a trainer to do something, I would go. So I started doing a lot of TV. One of my clients was the editor-in-chief of Fitness Magazine. She brings me in as a contributing editor. I've been writing since I'm in 2nd grade. So I've always had a writing background. I used to write about music. When I moved to fitness, I started writing about fitness, but I always wrote. So I started writing some articles, freelance articles, and I started getting published. And in my career at Equinox, I was very in demand. I had a lot of clients in and out of Equinox, and I spoke at conferences because I'm a good teacher. So I would teach people what I knew about this, and I would speak at the conferences, personal training conferences, and I would basically parrot everything I had been taught as a trainer. So all of my nutrition information came from the American Dietetic Association, which is, I've said in print many times, the most dangerous organization that ever existed, posing as a health organization. They don't call themselves the American Dietetic Association anymore. They call themselves the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. It's the same thing. And they taught us low fat, count the calories, get on that Stairmaster and work it all off, and you will be wonderfully thin. And I believed it. So I was the guy that if you went out for breakfast and you ordered the egg white omelet, which is what we all ordered then, the dumbest nutritional experiment of the last 100 years, order the egg white omelet, it comes with a little bit of yolk. I send it back because I know that if I eat that, I'm going to get a heart attack because there's cholesterol in it. So that's where I was. And we taught this crap to our clients. And as long as I taught that when I was speaking at conferences, they loved me. They thought I was the greatest teacher ever, and I communicated so well. But what started to happen in the early 90s was that the Atkins diet, which came out originally in 1972 and went through 3 editions, the 3rd edition had just come out, early 90s. So it's getting a lot of attention. And we would have clients come in who were not getting results on low-fat calorie counting, Stairmaster, joyless time on the Stairmaster, all that stuff. And they weren't losing weight. And they'd come in and they'd say, Johnny, my golfing buddy went on this Atkins diet. I think I'm going to try that. Or, my hairdresser is telling me she lost 30 pounds on Atkins. I think I'm going to give that a try. And we, not just me, but my fellow trainers, we would be horrified. We would say, Mr. Jones, you cannot do that. It's an insane diet. This guy should lose his medical license. The fact that, he's telling you to eat pork rinds, and it was just unfathomable how crazy this sounded. And we would warn them and say, yes, you might lose a couple of pounds. They lose pounds by models do cocaine all morning and they lose weight. And they say, but you're going to die. You can't do this. And they didn't listen to us. Can you imagine? And I remember specific clients, but one in particular really wasn't morbidly obese, but he was pretty fat. And he comes back, and he wasn't the only one, but he's the one that stands in my mind. And significant amount of fat is gone. Most important, his eyes are clear. He tells me his blood pressure's gone down, and his triglycerides have dropped. And his doctor doesn't know what to make of it. And this is a time when people would come into their doctor, and they'd see those results, and they'd say, wow, Mrs. Jones, this is amazing. What are you doing? And they say, I tried the Atkins diet. They go, no, you can't do that. That's impossible. They wouldn't. So that was me. Except there's a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance. Have you heard of it? And it basically means for the audience that two things that are contradictory can't both be true. So if the kid next door is the sweetest kid you ever met, and then you find out that he went on a shooting spree from the book depository, those two things don't fit. So here's a guy who was formerly 240 pounds, and he's standing there now, and he's 30 pounds lighter, and he looks 100% better, and he hasn't died. And I have these two cognitively dissonant pieces of information. Either the Atkins diet with all its fat and meat kills you, or this guy is an illusion, or this guy is real, and something about that information isn't right. So I began to question it. And I didn't really know much about research, but I knew how to go to PubMed, and I looked up some studies, and it wasn't adding up. And I began to question it. So when I would go and speak now, I would often say, I know we've all been told saturated fat is going to kill you and it's going to clog your arteries. But I wonder whether or not some of that information I would question it. And immediately everybody said, who is this guy? He doesn't have any credentials. He's not an MD. And he's not even a nutritionist. He's a personal trainer. What does he know? So there have been cases of this where people were kind of ostracized from their field because they didn't have the right credentials. So they went back and got the credentials and then said, you know what? The brilliant Dr. Bernstein, Richard Bernstein, who wrote The Diabetic Doctor, was a diet, was a is a type 1 diabetic who was an engineer, and he was also laughed out of the world for like telling people his theories about how to reverse diabetes. And so he said he went back, got an MD, and then told them the same thing and told them to, so I went back. At first, I got a 1-year certificate in nutrition called a certified nutritionist. And then I went on, I already had a master's. I went back to school, got a PhD in what was called then holistic nutrition, which now would be called functional medicine nutrition or functional nutrition. Got my PhD, and then I got board certified by the American College of Nutrition, the certifying board of nutrition specialists. So I'm board certified. Now I come back, and now I tell them, guys, you're full of it. And from then on, I was a good personal trainer, but I was a great nutritionist. And I just decided there's a lot of people who can teach how to do a bench press. There's not a lot of people who can demystify the massive amount of bad nutrition information that we have. So I kind of transitioned to doing much more nutrition, much less personal training. And then I got my first book deal, and that's pretty much all I've been doing ever since. And it is basically, I consider it speaking truth to power. And when you see how these regulations and how these recommendations get formed, and you understand how the sausage is made, and you see the backstage stuff that goes on with regulators and industry capture of regulators and stuff like that, you really see what a load of what is being taught to the American public about nutrition.
And so does medical school. I mean, they don't teach nutrition very well.
They don't teach it at all. 25% of medical schools have one single nutrition course. The rest have none. And that nutrition course is about what a home economics course in high school would be.
Exactly.
So I always say, with all due respect, you are not among the people I'm talking about, but I always say to clients, asking your doctor about nutrition is like asking your accountant about your golf game. I mean, why would your accountant know anything about golf? They don't learn that. He might be a good golfer, but then he took golf lessons outside of accounting school. He did not get it in accounting school. So why are you asking him that? And all my life working with clients, I've had them, I'm going to ask my doctor about that CoQ10. No, he doesn't even know what it is.
And fighting the food industry and commercialization and all of this soda and the things that, you go to watch Olympic is mostly Coke and McDonald's.
And the reason that cholesterol became a kind of really touchstone for me, because it wasn't all this time, when I began to see these clients literally changing their lives with diets that we would have thought were absolutely horrific, high fat, high protein, low carb. I mean, this was madness in the late 80s, is that I began to ask myself, why have we been told saturated fat is poison? There's really only one reason, because it raises cholesterol. But what if cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease? What if raising cholesterol by itself is not the worst thing that you could possibly do? Well, what happens to the dietary recommendations? They crumble like a house of cards because they're built on one fear, which is that if you eat this, something's going to happen to your total cholesterol, and that is a surrogate for dying or heart disease or heart failure or CVD or any one of the variations of cardiovascular disease. What if that's not true? And why are we avoiding saturated fat? So that's kind of how the great cholesterol myth got conceived. And when I went to at that time, I had several successful books. The biggest of which was the 150 Healthiest Foods on Earth. It just had but there was a 10th anniversary edition of it. And it continues to be a bestseller. And what editors like to do, much like movie producers, they like sequels. They like, when they have a hit franchise like Die Hard or Fast and Furious, they want Fast and Furious 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. So with the 150 Healthiest Foods, they wanted the 150 healthiest ways to build energy, the 150 healthiest ways to live longer. There was a lot in that series. And they came to me few years in, and they said, we got the greatest idea for a book. The 150 best foods to lower cholesterol. And I said, well, guys, the truth is, I don't think I'm the one to write that book because I think that's the wrong target. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, that isn't, it's not, and I began to send them, information. And I said, this is not the book I want to write. And finally, when I proposed that we write a book about the great cholesterol myth, they said, absolutely not. No way are we publishing a book with this cockamamie nutritionist that was going against all. They eventually agreed to do it on 2 conditions. But one, I have an MD co-writer. 2, actually 3 conditions. MD has to be a cardiologist and has to be a well-known, internationally recognized cardiologist. If I had a person like that as a co-author, they'd let me write it. So I call up Steve Sinatra, who was a friend of mine and who I knew from conferences at the American College of Nutrition and stuff like that. And I knew how he thought about these things. And I said, Steve, you want to write a book about the great cholesterol myth? He said, I'm in. So I bring Steve Sinatra to the editors. They go, you got it. He was the best co-author I could have had. And that's how we got together, and that's how we wrote that book.
Thank you for the background. I was just wondering, Johnny, could you describe, well, sometimes in science, oftentimes the answer is, it depends.
It's always,
we're not right. Why do you think good and bad have been used to describe cholesterol, and why has cholesterol in food been often cited as something to avoid? Because we know that most of that cholesterol isn't even absorbed anyway.
So a couple of reasons, a couple of answers to that. Let's start with the second question. They knew from the beginning that dietary cholesterol, such as in eggs or shrimp, did nothing to blood cholesterol, unless you were in the, I don't know what the percentage is now, 0.01 or 0.05% of the population that has familial hypercholesterolemia, except for that tiny little genetic anomaly that a very small percentage of people have. You could sit here and eat cholesterol all day long and it wouldn't really affect your blood cholesterol. So they've known that from the beginning. Our wonderful government and the people who make up these regulations kind of decided too complicated for people to understand. You mean you can eat cholesterol, it doesn't matter if you eat it, but it's bad if it's in your... Now, let's just say it's all bad. It's much too complicated for the American people to make that distinction. So they kind of demonized it across the board. So people are like, well, I can't eat eggs because it's got cholesterol. So that's the answer to how we ignored what we knew to kind of just put a blanket, it's a bad compound, it's a bad molecule. The good and the bad is just a extremely simplistic way to look at a very complex phenomena. And why do we find simple ways to look at complex? Because we're not that smart. And we don't make, especially now, I mean, God, looking back then, it seems like it was the age of Stoicism, all the philosophers and stuff like that. It looks so much smarter and distant than now. But now you've got attention spans of 4 seconds, 4 to 11 seconds. You're bombarded with, nobody can make distinctions and look at gray levels. A banana is good, is spaghetti good? It's good or it's bad, it's this or it's that. And in their defense, it did look like cholesterol behaved, the LDL and the HDL behaved differently. And the shorthand became good and bad. Now, as I point out, every time I do a podcast, I don't have to you, maybe to the audience, there's no such thing as good and bad cholesterol. There is cholesterol. It is the exact same molecule if you look at it under a microscope, regardless of whether it's an LDL or an HDL. The example I always use is, I'm Johnny Bowden. I'm a passenger on a plane. If I go to the airport and I get on a plane to Cabo, or if I get on a plane to Philadelphia, I am the same passenger. All that has changed is the plane. So what we should be looking at are the planes, the lipoproteins. That's where the action is. It is not about the cargo, which is the cholesterol. It is about the boat, which is the lipoprotein. What gets damaged and gets caught in the endothelial wall is the lipoprotein. the small, oxidized, atherogenic, inflamed lipoproteins, the small ones. What we knew in 1963 about, actually it travels in two containers, and one's L and one's H, and we'll call one good and one bad because one takes cholesterol to the organs, the other takes it away. Since it's a bad thing, obviously the stuff that takes it away is the good one. We now know there's the last I looked, there were 13 different subtypes. There's HDL2, 2A. Now, the best cardiologists are not even talking about the type of it. They're talking about whether it's functional HDL or non-functional HDL, or dysfunctional HDL. LDL comes in oxidized LDL, LP little a, LDL3, 3A. There's 13 of them. To call, to do this good and bad is as simplistic as giving a medical diagnosis depending on whether you're short or tall. I mean, it's just 1963 medicine. So what we want to do, what Peter Attia calls 3.0 medicine, not 2.0 medicine, is we want to look at the size of the LDL particles and the number of the LDL particles. And that is what every modern cholesterol panel looks like, except insurance doesn't cover it. And now we go back to the medical industrial complex. They got a very good system there where if your total cholesterol goes up to 206, you get on a statin. It's a $31 billion a year industry. Nobody wants to screw with it. You're going to start looking now at particles and doing more expensive tests. But those tests have been around for over a decade. Cardiac IQ, the LabCorp calls it the LPIR. They include an insulin resistance one. Other ones call it advanced cardiac profiling, the NMR particle test. But those tests are all over the place and everybody gives them. And to get a prescription for a statin based on less than that is just malpractice as far as I'm concerned.
Based on your book, Johnny, I went to Quest Labs and got a NMR lipid panel done. I didn't use my insurance. I just wanted to see how much it would cost. It was $44. And
yeah,
so
that's the other thing. That's the other thing. Half these things are not that expensive. But we have trained Americans to I don't pay for that. If insurance covers it, I'll take anything. It's very hard to talk about this stuff outside of the political, economic, and market forces.
That's what drives medicine in America is the pharmaceutical and the insurance and all of that. Who you think should be on statin in your opinion? At what point you should consider statin? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, let me start with what you shouldn't consider.
Okay.
Total cholesterol.
Right.
There's a wonderful book. I know both of you know it, but the audience doesn't. I always come on podcasts and I promote other people's books, not my own. But the best book, in my opinion, that was ever written on anti-aging is called Outlive by Peter Attia. And it did spend 6 months on the New York Times bestseller list. It's one of the few books in health that deserved to be on the New York Times bestseller list. And this is what Peter Attia says about total cholesterol. And this is a quote. Your total cholesterol has as much to do with your risk for heart disease as your hair color. So if you're getting a prescription for a statin based on a total cholesterol number, you should change doctors. That's first thing. Does that mean statins have no place? No, they do. Steve and I were frequently accused of being anti-statins. And again, that's the marketing. It's just easier to say, that than it is to explain the nuances of choosing the right patient for the right drug. And that's just way too nuanced. It's just like they're anti-statins. Steve would prescribe statins once in a while when he thought that they were useful. You have to remember that all of the initial research on statin drugs, all of which was drug companies supported, was done on middle-aged men with previous heart disease. And in middle-aged men with previous heart disease, statins have a place in a secondary prevention plan. They had no evidence for primary prevention, meaning that you haven't had a heart attack, but this is going to prevent it. But they did have some evidence that it reduced the risk of a second heart attack if you already had one and you were a middle-aged man. But then they did a brand extension. Well, we're selling a lot of them to middle-aged men, but hell, what about women? What about older people? What about 13-year-old kids? You don't want them to get a heart attack, do you, Mrs. Jones? And then they started doctors would go, and there was a doctor, I probably intentionally forgot his name, David Agnes, who I respected in many, many ways. And he went on television and said, statins are the greatest, they should be in the water supply. This is from a doctor who was pretty good. So we were not ever anti-statins. We were anti the massive over-marketing and over-prescription of statins to people for whom there was no likely benefit. That's not the same as being anti-statins. So if somebody were to go to a doctor who practices what Peter Attia calls medicine 3.0, which is the full patient medicine, functional medicine, looking at everything and how it's all connected together, and they go, I think in your case, a statin might be one of the treatment modalities we want to incorporate, I go, yeah, give me the prescription. But when some hack who's been trained to treat by numbers looks at a total cholesterol and says, oh, it's 230, we put you on a statin, or I'm firing you as a patient, which I have seen happen. And those people, we just got to wait for them to die out.
What do you think of the, one of the things a lot of my patients are afraid, coconut oil. While I travel around throughout the world, so many people eat coconut oil and saturated and very well. So what are your thoughts on that as a saturated fat?
I love coconut oil. Now, most of the fat in coconut oil is what's called medium chain triglycerides, MCTs, and there are 4 MCTs. And actually, most of the MCTs in coconut oil are a semi-MCT. It's called lauric acid, and it's a 12 carbon fatty acid. And that one actually behaves more like a long chain acid. It's right on the border. Anything that has low, medium, and high is going to have a transition one. 12 is the transition one for that. So it's not even really an MCT, but technically MCTs are saturated fats. But yeah, I love coconut oil. In fact, when Mehmet Oz, before he had the Dr. Oz show, he had a radio show on Sirius FM. He wasn't quite as famous as he was when he had his own show, but he was still Oprah's doctor, and he got this wonderful 1-hour show on Sirius with his co-author Mike Roizen from Cleveland Clinic. And they asked me, I came on, I hadn't written The Great Cholesterol Myth yet. He interviewed me about the 150 healthiest foods on earth. And I'm sitting there in the studio, and he has Mike Roizen on the HDMI line, the ISDN line, phoning in from Cleveland. And he asked me about coconut oil, and I said, oh, this is a great oil. It's very, very healthy. It's got the MCTs, it's got lauric acid, it's antiviral. It helps form keto. It just does a lot of great things. And Mike Roizen gets on and says, I beg to disagree. This is a horrible food. It will raise the risk for heart disease. You will die from it, and you're giving out bad information. 10 years later, coconut oil was on their website as a superfood.
Yeah, still some patient, because of this cardiologist, they tell them, this is saturated, don't have, but, it's that traveling, so many people have it, such a misunderstanding. The same thing with eggs, as you mentioned before. I say I was in Albany in New York. There was a patient came to the ER because broken legs, because working in an egg farm, not chicken farm, and he was allowed to only eat eggs, but not the chicken. He ate 17 to 25 eggs a day.
Was that the guy in the New England Journal? There was a case study of one of these guys, 20 eggs a day.
I'm not sure it was that one or not, but they kept him because of the legs for the night. The next morning to do a lipid panel, all his cholesterol was perfect. I think his total cholesterol, if I remember, was 175. And the guy can tell you, he says, I eat eggs with this vegetable, I eat this, I'm not allowed to have chicken. The guy's, everything was perfect. And he says minimum 17 up to, depending how much he works. But yeah, so it's very interesting that, and I have friends right now, if I go out for them for breakfast, they will still have, they want the white eggs omelet. So it's very sad that they have pushed this, I think, misinformation to so much that people cannot get away from it.
You mentioned something that just reminded me of my own. This is my own personal case with cholesterol numbers. You said his cholesterol was perfect. It was 175. So was mine. So for my entire adult life, up until like maybe 8 or 10 years ago, I got the regular 4 metric blood tests and high, HDL, LDL, triglycerides, blood sugar. And my total and LDL were fine. They were just great, but any cardiologist would want. And then I learned what I have just been talking to you about the particle test, and I had the real cholesterol test, and the numbers were very, very different. So there I was with my perfect 175 and whatever, under 100 LDL, and I had extremely high particle number. I was in the red zone. They do it by color. I was in red on particle number, and I was pattern B, which means most of the LDL, of which there was too many particles, was of the small atherogenic kind, not the cardiovascularly neutral, large, fluffy kind. Very, very different. So those good and bad cholesterol tests can not only mask, they can give you a very, very false picture of what's really going on underneath the hood, even when they're very good tests, because they're not telling you, are these nasty little ones that cause trouble, or are they kind of the big fluffy ones that don't cause any problem? Are there too many of them, boats in the water, or so in my case, it was actually masking some very big risk factors using that test. So I just don't, I really try to, they're now talking about using ApoB as a surrogate for the particle test, because at least cardiologists know what that is. And it's a decent surrogate for the particle test. But if you're not doing either and you're just looking at total cholesterol and LDL, that's just idiotic.
Do you agree with, Johnny, do you agree with Atia to drive down LDL and ApoB down to extraordinarily low levels? I think the book he talks about driving it down to like 30 to 40, like levels that we have as a baby.
I love Peter Atia's work, and I would be presumptuous and an idiot to say, oh, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about, because he's as good a doctor as I've ever heard of in my life. But I do think that he's a little obsessed with those numbers, and I don't think that seems a little problematic to me. As you probably know, when cholesterol goes down too much, risk factors for a whole bunch of other things that can kill you go up. So this is not a perfect inverse relationship. The lower it goes, the better it is. No, the lower it goes, and now you have risk for accidents, depression, suicide. Now, why would that happen? Why would you have a higher risk for suicide and accidents? Because it works in the brain. And you can't lower cholesterol to zero in the brain or you'll die. Not that he says you should lower it to zero, but he is very, very, very concerned with preventative stuff, rightfully so. He's very smart. I learned a great deal about cholesterol from his courses. But I am not in general, at this age in my life, after being practiced for 32 years, I have come to believe that there are things more important than the metrics on a lab test. And what I try to teach now is how we can focus on those bigger picture things. You can't change your HDL. You can't always change your LP little a. But you can change so many things that are deposits in your health bank account. And I think we should be looking a little more on that rather than obsessively detailing, trying to get numbers down to zero. I just don't know. I love Peter Attia, and in his book, he talks about what he would do to reverse engineer so that you would be very functioning at 100. And he's got, you need 2 Excel spreadsheets to go over balance exercises, stability exercises, high intensity training. He does his bow and arrow 4 times a week. The things that this guy does. And I'm very fond of telling this story because it kind of sums up where I am in my life and what I believe is the important message. So a bunch of researchers decided to reverse engineer this. They said, okay, we get Peter Attia's looking for how do we become healthy 100-year-olds. He looks mathematically, he's a mathematician on the side. He looks at how much muscle mass do we use every year. Okay, this is how much weight training you have to do in the 40s in order to not be there in the 50s, and like that. So the researchers said, let's go look at some kick-ass 100-year-olds and ask what they do. Instead of let's do this because we want to get there, let's look at people who are already there and see what lessons we can learn from them. So they went to Sardinia. which has the highest population of 100-year-old men in the world who are fully functioning and doing stuff. And they observed them, and they came away with 3 takeaways. They said, okay, there are 3 lessons here that we could apply if we wanted to learn what they do different than us. Lesson number 1 was live in a place with a lot of stairs. You ever seen Sardinia? You can't go out of the house without walking up and down hills. So basically, you could translate that to just walk everywhere constantly. Second lesson, spend a lot of time around gentle animals. A lot of them are shepherds. They're out in the beautiful hills in nature, in the sun, with the gentlest, sweetest animals in the world. What does that do to your parasympathetic nervous system? And the third, and most important, the number 1 with a bullet lesson for longevity and health had nothing to do with cold plunges. It had nothing to do with HIIT, high intensity interval training. It had nothing to do, you know what it was? Make your friends and your family your number 1 priority. End of story. You got this study going on at Harvard for 4 generations, the happiness study, right? Number 1 lesson. What makes people healthy and living longer? Family and friends. End of story. And that's the part when you talk about like, how am I going to lower my LDL to 0? And how about we put some time into this stuff? Because you can do something about this. And in fact, I wind up, when I do a limited number of one-on-one personal sessions. I don't work with people on an ongoing basis and look at their food diaries. We do a kind of reset, a kind of strategizing, debriefing on the bad information that a lot of people have, a kind of a directional kind of recompassing. And what I always wind up doing is that a lot of these people come in obsessed about a metric or a lab value or something that they may or may not be able to change, but they're actually doing a lot of really healthy things that they don't realize are connected to their health. Playing with their kids, going on vacations with their grandkids, meeting their family, having dinners. And I go, you realize that that stuff's just as important? And they go, no. I said, yeah, that's the anti-aging stuff. That's what you want to be doing. What you're doing is the right. And they are so often told that what they're doing is the wrong thing. They're eating the wrong thing. They're taking the wrong supplements. They're not looking at the right metrics. But when they go, oh, you mean I'm actually making deposits in my health bank by playing with my kids or by making love to my wife or petting my dog or doing whatever? That's really good for me? Yes, that's better for you than lowering your cholesterol to 0. That's how good that is for you. And they always leave happier because nobody told them that. So my mission in life at age 77 is to tell people that that's what really counts. And I can say it with some authority because I've been 30 and I've been through this and I'm coming out the other side at an age when a lot of people are like, they don't feel as good as me. They don't look that good. They're kind of like on the way out and you can kind of tell everything about. And I can tell you that doing this stuff works because I show pictures when I do webinars of me 35 years ago. And I'm telling you, you say, who is that fat old guy? I got from that to this. And not that I'm such a model of that, but I mean, I'm 77. I got married 6 months ago to the love of my life, who I've been with 14 years.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
We have dogs. I play tennis 2 hours a day.
Good.
I have the most wonderful friends you can imagine. That's
what life is all about.
Even with lousy metrics on a test. So.
That's terrific. That's great. So what's your average diet recommendations? Just,
very simple. Oh, it's so simple. You're going to love it. 3 words. Eat real food, period. End of story. And I end lots of podcasts with that because there's so much. What's the perfect diet? There is no perfect diet. The perfect diet is the perfect combination of diet and person. The right diet for the right person. It's not the right diet. It's the right diet for the right person. And they all start with real food. In my opinion, eating real food, and I'll define it in a minute, trumps whatever diet plan, whatever macronutrient distribution you can come up with, whatever supplement. If it's real, you start with that. Everything else is details. And that's something people can leave a webcast or a seminar or a book with that basic information. It's not complicated. And then they go, well, what's real food? Well, it's not kale chips. It's food that if your great, 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 great grandmother was here and you gave it to her, she'd know what to do with it. They went to the blue zones. They showed them supermarket food, and the people, what do I do with this? So it should be food that would spoil if you left it outdoors. It would be food that not even grandmother, but 3 generations ago, great grandmother would have known exactly what to do with. It's food I used to call, from the Johnny Bowden 4 food groups, food you could hunt, fish, gather, or pluck. You don't have to hunt it and fish it, but if you could have hunted it, you could have fished it, you could have plucked it from a tree or grabbed it off the ground, it's probably real food.
Great advice. Good family relationship, good real food.
Real food. And then I always recommend that people, I taught a couple of courses in fasting. I was very into that for a while. I still do it all the time. And there are lessons from the fasting community that we can all incorporate. The first is, don't eat between meals. The second is, let 4 hours go between meals. The third is, don't eat 2 hours before sleep. If you could do those, that would even probably allow you more junk if you could just eat it according to those rules. And those rules apply whether you're fasting or not fasting.
Follow the circadian rhythm. Eat during the day, don't eat too much before you go to bed. And as the GI physiology, when they eat 4 hours before going to bed, it starts with reflux. Then they cannot sleep. Then it goes on to sleep apnea. Then the next morning they don't want to eat, and just goes on. Just a simple change of not eating. And unfortunately, today's in America, they work so hard all day, come here, humongous dinner, and go straight to bed. So reversing that changes so much, not cholesterol, lifestyle, longevity. Yes.
Not to mention that probably certainly one of the 3 top things for aging well and for being healthy is sleep, and nobody's doing it right. Nobody's, except for people who are seriously studying this stuff and figuring it out. We just don't sleep well. And the number one thing that people have come to me for, and other clinicians tell me, it's back pain and lack of energy. Those are the 2 main things people see doctors for. And the lack of energy is like, what can I take? No, there's nothing that you can take for energy. What you can do is find out why you don't have it. And one of the reasons, I had a professor in grad school who used to say, if outside your window you hear hoofbeats, don't start by looking for zebras. Start with the more obvious. You don't have energy. It's not because you're lacking some supplement from GNC. It's because you're not sleeping enough or well. That affects your energy level. It affects your motivation. It affects your outlook. It affects your nervous system. It affects everything. And people are always surprised about, they always look in diet books for diet and exercise, diet and exercise. What about sleep? What about relationships? What about sunlight? What about pets? I mean, these things are huge contributors to your overall health, and huge. And we kind of put them on as an asterisk. We devoted 1/3 of that book to stuff that has nothing to do with diet and exercise.
Johnny, one of the things that came up in the book quite a bit, and I'm very interested in, as I'm interested in cancer prevention as an oncologist, is the cancer risk with the statins.
I don't have that top of mind to tell you what the statistics say about that. But I do know that the drug company sponsored research is reported very selectively. So you might have a group that went on statins and a control group. And there may be 2 less deaths from heart disease in the statin group. They'll report that. They may leave out that there were also 2 more deaths from cancer or diabetes. And as John Abramson of Harvard used to say, is it a successful treatment if you die of a different disease? Not really. So I don't know what the specific cancer risks are, and I don't want to sound like some crazy conspiracy theorist and say, oh, you're good. I don't know. But I know that Beatrice Golomb at Stanford University did a study, a seminal study, easily looked up on PubMed, about statin side effects. And she found not only a list this long, which has all been published, but she found that 65% of doctors don't report them. Do you want to know why? They don't believe their patients. they've been so well marketed by the drug companies with their wonderful little attractive people who come into the office with lunch and samples and color graphs showing the research. They've been so well marketed that and I play tennis with a lot of older people. I play tennis with some very young people, but I also play with people in their 80s, and good players, by the way. And they would come in, and you can see it. And they'll go to their doctor and they'll say, doc, ever since you gave me that Crestor, I'm forgetting my wife's name. Oh, no, it's just no, Mr. Jones, it's just mild cognitive impairment. It has nothing to do with the statin. It's your age. Or, doc, ever since you gave me the Lipitor, I have this muscle pains. No, it's just it's just low-grade arthritis. It's to be expected. They don't report them as side effects. The statin companies have convinced them that this is just internet stuff and people are just following this stuff, and it's not true. So she found that 65% of doctors don't report the side effects. And the statin companies continue to say the side effects are rare, but they're not. Now, you and I, in a moment, would take a drug with a lot of side effects if it was going to save our life. If we had a rare form of cancer and there's an experimental drug and they say, look, you're going to get a cold, you're going to forget your memory, you're going to do this, but it may save you and it's the only thing we have, sign me up. That's not the case with statins. So what we're doing is prescribing a drug with many possible side effects. It's true, not everybody gets them, but there's a laundry list of side effects. Little likelihood of benefit for many patients who are prescribed them, and they're never told about that downside. And I believe, going back to like what we pay for and what we don't, and the $44 test, if we had to pay for this shit, we would look at it a lot more carefully. But, my doctor says prescribed it and insurance covers it. That's as far as anybody looks. But if you said, here's this drug, you might get a 1% reduction in the risk of heart disease, not a 33% risk. You know that story, right? And there's a possibility of these side effects. And by the way, it costs, whatever, $50 a month. No, thanks. I think I'll pass.
I'll go exercise.
So again, not anti-statin, anti-marketing and propaganda. It's like what Joe Rogan once said about the vaccines. He says, I'm not anti-vaccine, I'm anti-propaganda. That's what I feel about the statins. Not anti-statin, I'm anti-propaganda.
I learned so much from you. I greatly appreciate it. And
I'm sure I would learn twice as much from you if I were interviewing you guys.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. So hopefully, actually, I played tennis for many, many years. And now I play pickleball for the past 10 years. So,
yeah, a lot of my friends.
Yeah, there's tennis players, they go to play pickleball to die.
Yeah, there's some who do both. A lot of tennis players don't like pickleballers because they take over our courts and they make
it's too noisy.
I'm a tennis player,
too much fun.
So I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah. But it's a great, my friend Daniel Amen, the psychiatrist, whose major focus is brain health, loves racket sports because there's no possibility of a head injury. They are great for hand-eye coordination. They're great for the brain, and you can do them till you're 100.
And stress management, you focus for that couple hours and that little ball, the life. For me, anytime I'm stressed out, I'll go play a couple hours and hold you person. So, actually, I watch Dr. Amen's shows on PBS quite a bit, and learned a lot about him as well. So hope to have you again in our show.
Anytime. This was a pleasure. Went by so fast. I can't believe it.
Yes. And
thank you.
And if in LA, sometimes I have plenty of avocado and citrus and stuff like that. Maybe
you have my contact. Please get in touch again. I'd love that.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to.
And my website has, if you want, I do personal consultations. People like them. And you can book it right on my website on johnnybowden.com if that's what you want to do.
Thank you so much, Johnny.
Definitely.
This was
I'm
awesome.
sure a lot of people will be interested.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.